In John chapter 13, we have the privilege of kind of eavesdropping in on Jesus' final words to his disciples on the last night of his life. And just to reset the stage, it's Thursday night in Holy Week. Tomorrow would be Friday, Good Friday. And so it's the Last Supper, this sermon, if you want to call the sermon that Jesus gives. It's 5 chapters long, John 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. It's the longest single teaching of Jesus in any of the Gospels. It's the largest block of teaching, and John records it here. It's not in the other Gospels. And so we get to hear Jesus' final words to his disciples, where he's going, why he's going, what he wants them to do after he leaves. And so it's really some incredibly important words that we get to kind of not only hear, but Jesus would be speaking to us as well today. Last week, Jesus did something incredible, and he washed his disciples' feet. God got down on his hands and knees on a dirty floor and washed the feet of his 12 disciples, even the one who would betray him. This week, Jesus is going to continue, and he's going to give a most important command to them, what they need to do after he leaves. And it has huge implications for you and I today. So, John 13, we left off at verse 20. We're going to pick up here verse 21. It starts like this. When Jesus had said this, talking about how basically Judas was going to betray him, after Jesus said that, he was troubled in his spirit. Listen, this is not easy for Jesus. I mean, you ever been betrayed? You ever been stabbed in the back? You ever knew it was going to happen right when it was going to happen? You ever sat across from the table from the person that you know is about to do it to you? You ever wash their feet and then know they're about, like this, emotionally speaking, in Jesus' humanity, he was a human that felt real human emotions. This was hard for Jesus, and it says it troubled him. He was troubled in his spirit, and he testified, "Truly I tell you, one of you will betray me." And the disciples started looking at one another, uncertain which one he was speaking about. These guys, they still had no clue, like which guy was the sellout. They had no clue, which tells me that Judas was a really good actor, right? He was a really good faker. And maybe you know some of those people like that. It tells me that we've talked about this, that you can be all around Christians, and you can be all around Christianity, and you can be all around church. You can even be all around Jesus and not really have it for yourself, not really believe it, not really possess it, not really it be yours. That's Judas' story. It's sad. Next, we're going to see, I love this scene next. This is the first time. I told you, John was so humble. He never uses his name in the Gospel of John when he's writing it. Even though he's in the story, he never names John. He never says the words John in John. And instead, he has a nickname for himself that he gave himself, the one that Jesus loved. And this is the next verse is the first time it shows up in John. And I don't think it was a prideful thing. I don't think he wore it pridefully. I think he just knew Jesus loves me. And it's like one of the most important things you can know in life, that Jesus loves you. John knew it, and so he called himself the one that Jesus loved. And so here we are, they're at the table, and it says one of his disciples, the one Jesus loved, John talking about himself, was reclining close beside Jesus. Again, they didn't sit in chairs. They kind of laid on the floor, laid into the table. This in the Greek, this reclining close, it literally means he was laying on Jesus' chest. He was that close to him that he was on Jesus' right-hand side, and he was leaning in on Jesus' chest. And John is there, and so next to John is Peter. And it says Simon Peter motioned to him to find out who it was that Jesus was talking about. And so Peter nudges John, ask him who it is, right? And so John then leans, verse 25, leans back against Jesus and asked him, "Lord, who is it? Can you imagine how tense this moment had to have been? Right? Like, hey, one of you 12 is going to betray me. And so Peter's like, ask him who it is. And John goes, Jesus, who is it? And it's silent, awkward silence. And then Jesus says this, he's the one I give the piece of bread to after I dipped it. So just imagine. Jesus says, it's going to be the guy I give bread to after I dip it. So next verse, he dipped the bread and he gave it to Judas, Simon Iscariot's son. Can you imagine that moment right there? Jesus takes the bread, rips a piece off, dips it in the oil. He's walking by you. You're like, oh my, is it me? I'm like, I don't think it's me, but, and he goes by and he goes and he gives it to Judas. Right? Imagine, the closest thing that I thought of how I would have felt is like when you're driving down the freeway and you're not really paying attention and all of a sudden you look in your rearview mirror and like, oh shoot, and there's cops and the lights are on behind you and like, oh, and like you go to pull over and he pulls over and goes to get the guy in front of you. You're like, oh, like I gotta believe that's how the other disciples felt. Like, oh, it wasn't me. Verse 27. It's kind of funny, too, to me. He hands it to Judas, and it says, after Judas ate the piece of bread. Like, so there's Jesus going down, and he hands it to Judas. Right? And if that was me, and he hands it to me, I would have dropped it and ran out of the room, like, and instantly, right? Judas, he goes down the line, hands it to Judas, and it says Judas eats the bread. Right? In that moment, Judas eats it. And it says, after Judas eats the bread, Satan entered him. So Jesus told him, what you're doing, do quickly. Right? So Satan is behind this whole thing. Right? Satan, and this is the great irony, Satan thinks he's about to win the battle. He's about to get Jesus to be sold out. He's got a willing participant. You could say, oh, Judas, poor Judas. No. Judas opened his heart to Satan, right? Judas was open. Judas closed his heart to Jesus and opened his heart to Satan. And so Satan comes in. He's behind this whole thing. And so Satan probably thought, this is it. I have victory. Little did he know that this very act was going to be the act of defeat for Satan when Jesus would go to the cross, which is why he came in the first place, conquer death and the grave. And so what Satan thought was going to be an act of victory was going to be an act of defeat for him. And so he probably thought he had Jesus, and Jesus is like, you don't have me, man, I got you. Nobody was making Jesus taking his life. Jesus was willfully laying down his own life. Right? Jesus is in complete control of this whole situation, even to the point where he's commanding Satan, what you're going to do, go do it. Right? He's demonstrating spiritual authority even in that moment, telling Satan in Judas, go do what you're going to do. Jesus is in complete control. And now verse 28, none of those reclining at the table knew why he said this to them. They still don't know. The guys are still clueless. Judas was so good for 3 years. They spent every day with the guy for 3 years. They still had no clue he wasn't legit. And so, since Judas kept the money bag, some thought Jesus was telling him, go buy what we need for the festival. Remember what time of it is right now? It's Passover time. The Jewish people are celebrating. That's a 7-day festival. And so some of the disciples thought, oh, Jesus is sending Judas out to go buy some of the supplies we need to celebrate Passover. They thought that. Or some of them thought he was sending Judas out that he should give something to the poor. They still didn't know what was going on. Verse 30, after receiving the piece of bread, he immediately left, and it was night. Right? It's interesting that John concludes this Judas betrayal narrative with these little words, and it was night. John gives this commentary. If you've been paying attention as we've been going through John, chapters 1 through 12, you know that John has talked a lot about light and darkness. Has called Jesus the light. In the beginning was the light. Jesus himself said, I am the light of the world. If any man comes after me, he will walk in the light, and the darkness will not be in him. Like, light and darkness is a big theme that runs through the Gospel of John. And so what I think, even why does John say, and it was night? Like, why does he add that in there? I think here's what he's saying, that Judas had the light sitting right there next to him, and he turns his back on the light, and he goes out into the night. He'd rather walk in darkness than have the light. He rejected the light, and he chose the darkness. And he literally left the upper room and went walking through Jerusalem in the darkness of night. And the same thing's true today, that you have that choice. That you're here and you have that choice. Do you choose Jesus? Do you choose the light? Do you want the light? Do you want the light in your life? Do you want to belong to the light? Do you believe Jesus is the light? Do you want to follow the light? Do you want to walk in the light? Or do you want to turn your back on the light and be a person of the night? Be a person of darkness. Be a person that walks not according to the light, but be a person of the darkness. The same choice is available for you today. Have you made that choice? Have you chosen Jesus the light? If you haven't, you automatically walk in darkness unless you've said yes to the light and choose Jesus, the light of the world. So Judas is going to leave, and then Jesus is going to declare some very important things about his glory. He's going to talk about glory, except when you read these next two verses, it sounds almost like a glory tongue twister. Like, you're going to read it, you'll see, and then you're going to be like, huh, what's going on here? Let's read them together, and then I'll explain them what's going on here. Verse 31, when Judas had left, Jesus said, now the Son of Man is glorified, and God is glorified in him. If God is glorified in him, God will also glorify him in himself and will glorify him at once. Got it? You're like, what? John, what are you saying here, bro? What's all this glory talk going on here? Right? So let's talk about it right here. I think when explaining it, you'll see it really clearly. Can you go back to verse 31 for me? The key word here is the very first word that Jesus says. The very first word that Jesus says, it says, when he had left, so Judas leaves, and Jesus says, now the Son of God is glorified, which is interesting because what really could have happened and what he really could have said, Judas eats the bread, gets up to leave, and Jesus could have said, well, now I'm about to be betrayed and be killed. That's the real now, right? That was what was going to happen next. They're going to go out to the Mountain of Olives. Judas is going to show up, and Jesus is going to be arrested, betrayed, and he's about to be killed. So Jesus could have said, well, now it's over, boys. I'm going to be killed. But that's not what he said. He says, as Judas leaves, instead he says, now the Son of Man is glorified. You're like, what? Here's what Jesus is doing. He's looking at the immediate action, which could be confusing, and he's giving the larger picture of what really is at play that God is doing that the guys probably could not see. And he's explaining how there's a bigger thing that's happening. And we would do that all the time, right? If you're in the kitchen and you got a wooden spoon and you're mixing some flour and ingredients into a bowl, and one of your kids walk in and they say, hey, what are you doing? You could say, well, now I got this wooden instrument and I'm pushing this flour around. And that would be true to the immediate context of what you're doing. But it wouldn't be really helpful answer to what you want to give the bigger picture as to what's going on. So if your kid walks in and says, what you're going to say, I'm making cookies. It's the bigger picture as to what is really at play, and it's going to help them understand where you're going. This is what Jesus is doing. He could have said as Judas left, well, now I'm dead. But he didn't. He said, now, here's what's going to happen. Now, when I do this, I obey the Father. The Father's going to shine his glory spotlight on me. And the Son is going to be glorified because he obeyed the Father. And because I obeyed the Father, I'm going to take the glory spotlight and I'm going to shine it back on the Father, who himself is going to be glorified. And we're going to mutually glorify each other, and it's going to happen at once. This is what Jesus is. This is the bigger picture. Guys, it looks like a bad thing. It looks like just a wooden spoon of flour, but I'm telling you, this is going to turn out really well. You're going to like this. It's going to turn out well. And so the Son's going to be glorified, and the Father's going to be glorified, and we're going to glorify each other, which, by the way, is the whole point of our lives, is to give glory to the Father. Every single one of us has a spiritual mirror. And your whole goal is that you are to take that mirror and you're to reflect the glory back to the Father, to give Him the honor and the praise, that it's all about Him, that we live for Him. And so our lives, when you live for your own glory, you're living for the wrong God. You've made yourself God, and you are an idol in your own life. Our own lives are to be lived for the glory of the one true God, that we take this mirror and we shine the glory back on our Father and say, you got to know my Father. You got to know the love of my Father. And this is what Jesus is saying I'm doing. Every time you obey God, you glorify Him. He's glorified. He's up there and He's like, yes, yes, yes. That's what it's supposed to. You give glory to God when you obey God. And that's what Jesus is doing. He's going to obey God. He's going to the cross. Judas leaves to sell Him out, and He's like, yeah, now I'm going to be glorified. Jesus is going to say some of the hardest words the disciples will ever hear next. Right after He talks about being glorified, He says this, little children, I'm with you a little while longer. You will look for me, but just as I told the Jews, and now I'm going to tell you, where I'm going, you cannot come. Now, I don't think we can appreciate the weight and the heaviness of these words at the moment they were spoken to these guys, because we know how the story ends. I mean, we know what happens next, and we know there's a happy ending to the story. Jesus wins. He comes back. We know. The guys didn't know that. Here's all they knew. At this moment, the guy that they left their family for, they'd left their house for, they'd left their job for, they'd left everything for, to go and to be with this guy every day, and they followed him every day for 3 years, all of a sudden turns and says, hey, you can't follow me anymore. It's over. I think it had to crush them. And I don't think they understood what He was saying. I know at least one of them didn't understand, because he's going to push back on that. Peter is going to push back on this in a second. But I know Jesus, He cared about these guys so much, so He uses a word here that is not show up anywhere else in the Gospels that Jesus spoke. It's this word, this Greek word, little children. It's a very tender word from a teacher to a student that cared about his students. And so Jesus is trying to help prepare them for what's about to happen next. If a man knew he was going to die, or he was going off to war, he was going to be in battle, he would write his children a letter, instructions, and he would start it with this Greek word, little children. And then he would give them the instructions that he wanted them to know if he was going to possibly not return. And in a sense, this is what Jesus is doing. He's giving these final instructions to His guys, because He knows He's going, and where He's going, they can't come. I want you to hear Peter's reaction. We're going to skip the next 2 verses, which we're going to come back. I'm going to end with those 2 verses. We're going to skip those 2 verses, and we're going to go to Peter's reaction to Jesus saying, hey, you can't follow me anymore. Peter, as you can imagine, has something to say about that. So verse 36, Lord, Simon Peter said to Him, where are you going? Like, come on, there's no place you're going to go that I'm not going to follow you. And Jesus said, where I'm going, you cannot follow me now, but you will follow later. And Jesus, that's a prophetic word, Jesus said, knowing that His guys, 11 of the 12 disciples, well, I guess 10 of the 11 disciples, would die martyr's death. They would follow Jesus, and they would end up where He's at, 11 of the 12. Only one, or 10 of the 11, because Judas left, 10 of the 11. Only one did not die a martyr's death. Anybody know which one didn't die a martyr's death? John, our boy John, right here, right? What happened to John? Well, John, he got in trouble for following Jesus, and he got exiled. He got sent to a remote prison in a Greek island called Patmos, right? And I got to visit Patmos when we did a study tour in seminary, visited Israel, and then did a study tour of Paul's missionary journeys through Greece, through Athens and Corinth and Thessalonica and Philippi. Maybe we'll do that trip after we do our Israel trip, right? And so we went from the mainland to, there's lots of those little islands, and we went to the island of Patmos, where John went. The worst boat ride I've ever had in my life, right? Like incredibly choppy seas. Honestly, there's about 20 of us students on this thing. People are hanging over the edge. They're tossing their cookies. Women were crying. They thought the boat was going down. There was like a little bench seat. It was a very not nice boat. A little bench seat, 10 students on this side, 10 students on this side. We hit one wave so hard, our professor fell off his seat and slid across the boat on the floor of the boat, ended up at my feet, and he goes, and I picked up his hand, picked him up, sounded like crazy boat ride. We get to the island of Patmos, right? And in Patmos, we all calm down. We take like 20 minutes to decompress and everything. And then we go and we find the cave where John supposedly was exiled to. And he wrote the last book of the Bible, the book of Revelation, in 95 AD. And so, incredible story. What am I talking about here? Why am I... Oh, Jesus said you can't follow me. I'm like, I'm pretty sure Patmos is not in this text. Why am I talking? All of the disciples were going to be martyred. All of the disciples except John would be martyred. Peter would die for his faith. Peter would be crucified. And when they went to the Romans, Nero blamed the Christians when Rome was on fire. And they went to crucify Peter, and church history tells us that Peter, when he was about to be crucified, said, I cannot be crucified the same way as my Lord, and requested to be crucified upside down. Peter loved Jesus and wanted more than anything to follow Jesus. And so when he says what he says, Peter sometimes gets a bad rap, right, as being this impetuous, speak first guy, put my foot in my mouth. You know what? He might be in all those things, but I tell you what, he loved Jesus. And he would follow Jesus anywhere. And so he says that in verse 37. Lord, Peter asked, why can't I follow you now? I will lay down my life for you. And he meant it. He meant it. Listen, everybody, you want a friend like Peter, right? It's your ride or die partner right there with you, who would be with you in it. And Jesus replied to Peter, will you lay down your life for me? Truly, I tell you, a rooster will not crow until you've denied me 3 times. So he's going to have a mess up, and we'll get to it in a couple of weeks. Actually, when we go to Israel, you'll see they built a church there. Jesus gets arrested. They take Jesus away. Peter's kind of following at a distance, ends up in a courtyard where they were like, hey, you're one of his guys, and he denies, right, and Jesus for the 3rd time. They built a church there, where it supposedly happened. And there's a church, and on the top of the church, you know what there is? A rooster on the top of the church. How would you like your greatest screw-up in history to be commemorated with a church and a rooster on the top? Oh, this is St. Peter Church right here. This is where, right? This guy, poor guy, you'll see when we go to Israel, we'll visit this place. Peter, he loved Jesus, and he meant it, that he wanted to go with Jesus. He wanted to follow Jesus. He will embarrassingly deny Jesus 3 times later, but make no mistake, he loved Jesus. He just chickened out. Come on. True story. I said it last night, not meaning it. I said he loved Jesus. He just kind of chickened out at the end, and I just was going to go on, and everyone started laughing. I'm like, oh, yeah, that is kind of funny. I'm like, I said I'm going to add that to my notes for tomorrow, and I put it in. So let's go back. Let's go back and let's look at these 2 verses that we skipped, and we'll close talking about these 2 verses. To me, you're like, what do we do with this story? Here's these 2 verses that we skipped. This is the application. This is, church, where I'm asking you to open your heart to really listen to what Jesus said. okay, in these two verses. And you got to understand the context, right? Jesus is talking about, he just said, I'm leaving, and where I'm going, you guys can't follow. And then we skip these two verses, and then Peter's like, no, I'm going to follow you. Right after he said, I'm leaving, and you can't follow, he says these two verses. Like, here, I'm leaving, here's what you got to get. Don't miss this, okay? Here is the takeaway of what Jesus is going to tell his guys. I give you a new command. Love one another. Just as I've loved you, you are also to love one another. By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples, if you love one another. Love shows up 12 times in the first 12 chapters. The word love is used 12 times, first 12 chapters. Chapters 13 through 21, the next 8 chapters, the word love is used 44 times. 5 of those 8 chapters is Jesus' last words to his guys in the upper room. It's as if he's trying to overstress love is such an important thing. When I'm gone, my people that are going to be down here got to be people of love. Can't miss this. He says, if I can have you go back to verse 34, he says, I give you a new command, love one another, to which, you might say, that doesn't sound new. I mean, I thought that was in the Old Testament, and you'd be right. It is in the Old Testament. It's all throughout the Old Testament. Hundreds of years ago, the command was given, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, strength, and mind, and to love your neighbor as yourself. So, Jesus, why are you saying this is a new command? It's been around for a long time. And here's what Jesus is saying. It's a new command with a new twist and a new definition of actually what it means to love. Let's look at the verse again. Here's what Jesus says. I give you this new command. I give you a new command. Love one another. Here it is. Just as I have loved you, you are to love one another. Here's the new part. Jesus gives a new, elevated picture, quantifier as to what love really is. What is love? Jesus goes, I'll show you. It's the way I've loved you. That's how you're supposed to love. I'm going to demonstrate to you what true love is. Students, kids, younger generation, listen to me. Love is not that feeling that you get the butterflies in your stomach when that certain somebody walks in the room that makes you your heart start to get flittery, and that is not love. That is infatuation. But if you mistake that for love and think that's love and base that relationship on love, years will go by and things change, and all of a sudden you don't have that same flittery heart. And you don't have those same butterflies. And we fall out of love. And the person walks into the room and you're like, can you get out of the room? I'm watching this here. And you don't want them in the room. And all these things happen because you've had a wrong definition of what love is. Here, Jesus says, let me tell you what love is. Love is sacrifice. Love is a commitment. Love is all about you, and I don't care what happens then back to me. Love is selfless. Love is an action. Love is humbly putting you first before me. Love is long-term commitment. Jesus says, I'll show you what love is. And he stretched out his arms, and he died. And he showed us what real love is. This is the new command. No longer is the measure of love to love your neighbor as you love yourself. Now the measure of what love is are you doing what Jesus did? Jesus said, now this is the measure of love. I would put it like this. Here's the takeaway today. We are to love exactly the way that Jesus loved. That is the new definition of love. What did Jesus do? This is what you and I are called to, church. And then he says in verse 35, by this everyone will know that you're my disciples if you love one another. So how will people know that we love Jesus and we belong to him and we're Christians? How? By the way you love one another. How will a watching world get a picture of Jesus? By the way the Jesus people love the way that Jesus loved, with a selfless, humble, giving, committed, sacrificial love. I'll say it like this. Love is to be the defining mark of us Christians. The mark of us Christians. It's what a watching world so desperately needs and is looking for. And I sense I say we on purpose, myself included, have a long way to go with this, as we have a lot of baggage to shed and a lot of perceptions to turn around. It's what he's called the church to. And I wonder how much in heaven it bothers Christ when he sees his people not loving the way he said. This is the command. This is the words that he said right after he said, I'm leaving. Here's what I want you to be about, love. Well, how, Jesus? What does love look like? Love the way I loved. That's what you're to do. And the challenge is, I think we're probably a lot alike, the challenge is in my own strength and in my flesh, like the flesh side of Joe, I'm not a loving person. Apart from God, I'm not. I'm a really selfish person. We're all pretty apart from God, selfish people generally. We think about ourselves a lot. I don't have a ton of love to give. That I do have goes to my wife, some to my kids. I save a lot for my dog, basically. I have a dog. That's it. In my own. And this is what I think a lot of the problem is for the church today, is that we've tried to do this love thing in our own strength. And we forgot that the only way that we're going to love with Jesus' love is if we stay connected to the source of love. And when you drift from God, love becomes almost impossible. Jesus-like love. Because you've unplugged from the source of love. In 1 John, the epistle John wrote, 1 John chapter 4, John says God is love. Like, you want to know, God is the very definition of love. And so as we stay connected to the source of love, we're able to love. A lot of the reason why we have a hard time loving people in this culture that we're in today, that's so angry and so divided and so opposite sides and all that, and there's no love certainly coming from a side, and we're supposed to be the Christians that are supposed to be the loving ones, but man, it sure feels like there's not a ton of love going that way, and it feels like there's more of this than more bridges of love. And part of the problem perhaps is because we've disconnected from the source of love. I mean, Jesus loved Judas and washed his feet the very night he knew he was going to sell him out. And so this is the tension and the challenge that we live in. And Jesus called it. Jesus called it. In Matthew 24, he said, listen, in the last days, as works of lawlessness increase, the love of many is going to grow cold, Jesus said. That's what he said is going to happen. One last thing, and then we're done. We can't miss this word. So, I feel impassioned about it because I believe it's Jesus' heart for his people. But when you boil it all down, you don't have to listen to me and my plea. It comes down to verse 34, this one word. It's the sixth word. It's the word command. I give you a command. It's a command from the general to his soldiers. Here's the marching orders. All right, what is it? Love. Love the way I've loved. I looked up the word command in the Greek. You know what it means? Do it. It just means do it. It's command. Like, not an option, not if you feel like it, not if the person's nice, not if they will love you back, not if they agree with you, not if you're having a good day, it is none of that. There are no qualifiers on the love that God's people are to have for people. It's just to love like Jesus. So here's how we're going to end. Let me ask the worship team to come. Let's just talk to the Father a little bit about our heart on this. Can we do that? Can you not check out on me? And let's let the Father search our heart a little bit. This might be the most important 5 minutes of the whole day today. I know today's a big day. There's something else going on this afternoon, but right now, I promise you, is more important than what happens at 4:25 today. So stay with me. Let's do this. Can I invite you to close your eyes and to bow your heads? And here's what I want you to do. I just want you to ask God a question. And the question I want you to ask God is to say, God, how am I doing with this love thing? And just listen to what the Spirit brings to your heart and mind. How am I doing, God, with this love thing? Here's a follow-up I want you to ask God. God, what is keeping me from loving the way you love? God, what's keeping me from being a loving person? And if God starts bringing some things to mind, would you just confess that? Would you do what we did in the song earlier? Would you just tell God, I'm sorry? Like maybe God's brought to mind, and he says, brought to mind, look, you're selfish. The reason you're not loving is because you're selfish. And just confess it. God, I'm sorry, I'm selfish. Please help me. Please take that selfishness away from me. Help me not to be selfish. Make that a prayer. Turn it around as a prayer to God. One of the things I think God would be saying to his church, the reason that we're not loving is because there's sometimes we're spiritually lazy and we don't want to do the hard work that it takes to love. We don't want to sacrifice. We don't want to be inconvenienced. We're spiritually lazy. One of the other things I sense that God would say to his church is part of the reason why we struggle to love is because we don't have any love to give, that we cannot give that which we don't possess. And some of you struggle to love because you don't have the love of God in you. And you've been believing a lie, maybe for a long time from the enemy, that sure, God loves others. I just don't think God loves me. I don't think God loves me. And so the reason why you can't love is because the love of God is not in your soul because you believed a lie. Today maybe is the day where you're going to stop believing that lie and you're going to believe the truth that no matter what your consequences and what your situations and what your life has looked like, the truth of the matter is that God does love you. And today you need to receive the love of God. Welcome it into your life. Believe it is for you, that he is for you. Last question I want you to ask the Lord. And I want you to say, Lord, could you just give me a picture right now of what my life would look like loving people the way you loved. God, give me a picture of my life loving the way you would love. That picture is God's will for your life. That's what the Father has for you, little children. That is his heart for you, to love the way he would love. To release the selfishness, to release the anger, to release the bitterness and the resentment, to ask God to take those things out of your heart and to replace them with love. So God, I pray that you would do that today. Make us spiritually aware of what is happening in our own souls, of what prevents us from being the people that you've called us to be. Father, I pray that you would so fill us right now with your Spirit, that we would act the way you've called us to act. Empty us of us. Empty us of our anger. Empty us of our pride. Empty us of our hatred. Empty us of our laziness. Empty us of our bitterness and resentment. And God, fill us with your Holy Spirit so that we can love Jesus like you loved us. Thank you. We receive your love even now. Thank you for your grace and mercy. And we turn our eyes to you. We worship you now in Jesus' name. Let's stand. Let's close in worship, church.